Hello and welcome to this tutorial of me doing a still life on heavy paint. Now I love heavy paint because of the simple brushes that it offers. And in this tutorial, I'm going to primarily be using the line tool with a little bit of texture, as you can see here, and the fill tool. And very similarly to how I paint in Photoshop when I use the U tool to create very simple rectangular graphic shapes as well as the elliptical tool, I'm kind of doing the same thing here. I'm slapping on a bunch of rectangles of different widths and lengths and ellipses of different widths and lengths to create a nice textural background for me to start doing my still life on. So you can see first that this might look like a simple still life, but it definitely kicked my butt, I remember, and still lifes are great for that. I highly recommend that if you're starting off as a painter, to try to do a still life every day or every other day if you can. It can be a very simple setup, and the reason why still lifes are so great is because it trains you to hone your observational skills and how light falls on form and creates the light and shadows that we see, the reflections, the colors, the bounce light, all of that. And if you can study something that doesn't move, that's gonna be a lot easier, right? And not to say that still lifes are easy. They're definitely not, depending on the complexity of your subject matter. Now, I'm a fan of the graphic, line tool, or simple shapes tool. So you can see now that I'm just using the line tool to quickly block in my biggest masses. We have the teacup, 2 orange slices, and the orange in the cup. And right now I'm really looking at the graphic shapes that I see and where the light side of my objects are and where the shadow side is. There's a very soft window light coming in from the right. I just took this on my dining table and I thought the lighting was really nice. It wasn't too harsh, it wasn't too strong, so I'm going to definitely take that into consideration. Now what I'm doing now, you see, is that even though I took all that time to create a cool, textural, warm, vibrant background, I'm going to start blocking in the background so that my other elements of my orange slices can pop. So you can see that the surface of the table is kind of a cooler, more gray, neutral gray color than everything else. And you can see that instantly, once I put that on, the orange, maybe it's an orange or lemon, I don't know at this point, but the orange lemon, or lemon orange, pops out, right? So right away, I'm trying to establish my color relationships from the get-go so that I can correctly put down colors of the right value and constantly compare all my elements together. So you can see now, even though it's just a very crude purplish gray background, it's not straight gray, by the way, it definitely has a more purplish tint, or so it seems compared to the oranges, right? So I'm also pairing complements with each other, orange, yellows, and purples with each other so that they really vibrate against each other. So you can see that right away, I can already feel the depth kind of coming through. And now that I'm adding in the shadows, very rough shadows, cast shadows and occlusion shadows that the orange lemon slices are putting down or casting, that grounds my subject matter even more, right? So if you are stuck on where to begin, my advice is to look at everything holistically. Try not to focus on one thing at a time. Don't focus too much on, for example, the first lemon slice on the left, then the second lemon slice to the right of it, and then the teacup. When you kind of go systematically like that, you risk looking and taking in the bigger design and the bigger whole of the painting, and you risk putting down values that might not work in your painting because you haven't really taken the time to judge your painting as a whole. So you should constantly ask yourself, is this value the correct value compared to the other values I put down, right? Maybe the other values I put down are lighter. So in turn, I need to lighten up my shadows as well, right? So for example, if I had maybe done a high key painting of this of the still life, right? Right now, the photo on the bottom left is more of a mid-key, right? All the values are around mid-value, but let's say I wanted to challenge myself and I wanted to paint a high-key version. I would have to incrementally and proportionally lift all my values in the light and the shadow lighter for it to really make sense. So that's what I mean by judging all your values against each other. And if you judge your values against each other with a critical, observant eye, your color will look better. Your color will be right if your value is right, but it doesn't work the other way around. So right now, I would say that at this stage, I have a pretty good block in. And that can take me anywhere from, a couple of minutes to 5 minutes to 10 minutes. I would say that this is a good stage to continue refining my shapes and start to add a little bit more complexity, because I have my main masses blocked in, my main subject matter blocked in. I have the rough color relationships and values blocked in. And once I have those things established, I can really now start going in and thinking about how to refine my shapes. How I can carve into certain shapes more, take away from certain shapes, add to certain shapes, and keep refining. So now that we have most of the things established, you can see that I'm starting to go in and really play around and smudge some edges a little bit, losing some edges, right? And I don't know if I talk about this a lot in my other videos, but I really think that knowing where and how to lose your edges can be a really great skill and insight to practice, because you're really able to group shapes better that way. When you are able to judge where to lose your edges, in other words, I look at it as the yin and the yang of combining shapes together, right? When you're losing an edge, you're basically losing the boundary between two shapes, and therefore you're sort of merging them together, right? So sometimes with a painting, whether it be a still life or a landscape, and whether it be digital or gouache, I do this for both mediums, I love to at one point just take a big brush and just swipe my painting sometimes for fun, sometimes out of frustration. Either way, 99% of the time, I find that it paves the way for new opportunities, new insights, and new experiences to be able to play around with shapes even more, pushing the boundaries that I probably maybe wouldn't have seen if I just kept building on top of shapes, hard edges. So it's a really fun thing to do, and I highly encourage you to try it. Sometimes just smudge, maybe, no, without paying attention to where. I know I'm a big advocate of being intentional with your strokes, but sometimes just smudge it and then practice fixing your painting from that smudge. Or sometimes, of course, you have to be careful and smudge certain areas, because believe it or not, one little smudge can make a big difference to how your eye views the painting, right? Suddenly, when two shapes become one, you might look at that shape or that object differently versus if it were clearly separated. So I really encourage you guys to try that. And it's a great way to problem solve your way through. And I love playing around with pushing and pulling my edges just to see where I can lose some areas and then where I can subsequently bring areas forward, right? It's always that push and pull, that tug of war game that I like to play in my head and painting on the canvas. So you can see that I'm adding some detail in the cup, but honestly, I'm really not focused so much on getting the exactness. To me, it's sort of a nice decor, and to me, that dark blue shape adds as a nice contrast to the rest of the lighter, more pastel colors that we see. So again, I'm really using those blue shapes as more of an element of contrast to really help draw your eye to the center. And you can see now that I've really popped the colors of the orange a little bit more. I'm going to call it an orange. Let's just stick with an orange, right? It definitely looks a little bit more yellow and pale in the photo, but I'm really taking liberties to pop that saturation a lot more. And I can do so because I'm letting my background stay more of a neutral gray. And if you've watched any of my other videos, you know that I love neutral grays. They're my best friend. I am drawn to paintings with, actually usually with more neutral grays. They just soothe me, and in any painting, I will always try to find an opportunity to add those warmer and cooler grays. And you can actually see, I want to point out that, remember when I toned my canvas in the beginning with all those bright stripes and shapes of color? I'm letting some of that seep through right now. And you can see that those little shapes that are seeping through, contrasting with my more purplish neutral grays representing the tablecloth, it really helps add a nice subtle tinge of vibration that maybe wouldn't have happened if I didn't let certain elements of the original background seep through. And you can bet that I'm letting some of that seep through in the orange as well. So that is why I love toning my piece with usually these brighter, warmer colors, because I love letting some of it seep through. And a lot of times it's not even intentional. Like some of these shapes, I just sort of leave some open. Maybe sometimes it's out of carelessness, but then I look at it later and I think, oh, that actually kind of works, so I'm gonna leave it, you know? So don't be afraid to push the boundaries like that. Now I want to talk a little bit about the colors I'm using in the orange. Now there's not a lot of contrast per se because the lighting is not as strong. It is a window light, and window light is usually not as strong as direct sunlight. But you can see that within the shadow areas of the orange, I'm playing with slightly subtle hue shifts of more reddish oranges to more yellow oranges and even a little bit more green oranges. So if you look on the color cube, which is what I like to use when I'm in Photoshop, it would be the equivalent of me sort of shifting up and down in that range where the oranges to greens are. So I'm sort of shifting in that range, and you can see actually on the top there, you know, it's the same as sort of shifting in my hues from the reds to the oranges to the left, around the left area of that hue bar, the first bar on the top here in heavy paint. Now this leads me to talk about exactly how the, I guess, color rows of heavy paint would work, or the top area where you are choosing the hue, the chroma, and the value of your color. There's a very similar element in Photoshop. I use the color cube in Photoshop. So when I was first using this in heavy paint, it definitely messed with my brain a little bit in a very good way, because you always want to challenge your brain. So I want to go over it really quick. The top bar, as you can see, is basically where you would choose your hue. And the hue is basically the name of the color. Red is a hue, yellow is a hue, sap green is a hue, bright neon green is a hue. You know, all those colors that you see, there's not really one set name for color. Different paint brands will have different names for turquoise, I don't know, for example. But you just need to know that the top bar is where you choose your hue. Now let's say you've chosen your hue and you think, okay, I want to choose an orangish reddish hue. Done. The second bar is where you're going to adjust the saturation, right? So the more you shift that lever to the right, the more saturated the color will be. And the more you shift your color to the left, the more desaturated your color will be. Now let's say I want it, I don't know, maybe more desaturated, right? Like right now I'm putting a more desaturated pinkish orange color in the background. Now I adjust the value. Do I want the hue, my color to be lighter, or do I want it to be darker, right? So if I shift the lever to the right, towards the white area, it's going to be lighter. And if I shift the lever to the left, it is going to be darker. So I love thinking incrementally like this because it really helps you break down, okay, what's my hue? What's the level of saturation I want, second of all? And third of all, what is the value that I want? And if you can get used to thinking that way, you are going to get so much better at really analyzing the colors that you put down. Alright, so now I've basically reached the stage where I can slow down and refine. And I love reaching this stage, and it's also very easy for me to overwork this stage a lot of the times, which is totally fine because when I overwork something, that's when I know when I can strip back, right? Oftentimes, when you push too far, that's the way you can see where you think, oh, okay, I did add too much. Now I know where to strip back. It's all about being able to compare so that you can know, right? So you can see that in the background, I've definitely added more warmer neutral grays, right? Before it was kind of more of a bluish purple, and now I've added these smaller shapes of warmer desaturated yellow oranges to really tie in those colors to the orange, right? Believe it or not, those colors will help tie everything in because we have orange and reds and a little bit of yellow greens in the orange itself. So I'm constantly thinking about how I can tie my colors together all in my picture, right? Working with complements are great. And complements basically mean the colors that are the opposite side on the color wheel. They're on opposite sides of each other on the color wheel. So that's why neutral grays are so important, because neutral grays are created by mixing those complements together. So you basically have the best of both worlds combined in one color. And that color, or that neutral gray, is basically the mediator or the glue that ties in those other colors that are otherwise complements and vibrating against each other, maybe sometimes fighting against each other, that ties it together. So that's how I like to think of neutral grays. That's one of the great abilities of neutral grays to elevate a painting. So you can see now that, I'm enjoying the shapes that I have in my oranges. I kind of like that fragmented look, or I don't know, mosaic-y look, not really fragmented, but a mosaic-y look, for lack of a better word, in the oranges. And I'm quite happy with how I've captured the translucency and the light hitting it. And you could see now that I have a little bit of that bounce light on the teacup, but it's a little bit bright, so I'm just gonna tone that down right now. That is bounce light coming from the orange onto the teacup. Because the teacup is white, it really absorbs a lot of the color that is around it. So fixing things like that is the stage that I would do that now. I would do that at the stage where I'm really looking at it with a fine tooth and thinking, okay, where are areas I can finesse? Where are areas I can tighten my edges? And where are areas I can further lose my edges? Where is the value slightly off in some areas? And maybe where is the value changed to jarring, right? For example, the shadow that is cast on the left from the teacup and the oranges, you could really group that as one color or one shape if I really wanted to. I have these sort of shifts going on, but I could even simplify that even more to really further draw your eye to the area of most complexity, which is the subject matter or the still life. Now I want you to notice something I did, which is that I kept the occlusion shadow of the oranges warmer than the actual cast shadow. And that's because, to me, the orange color of the skin of the orange is bouncing on to the table, and therefore the occlusion shadow in turn becomes much warmer. And you might have heard of this cool light, which is the window light. The window light is a little cooler because it's daytime, creates warmer shadows in comparison. And I like to say cooler with an ER and warmer ER, because that denotes comparison. And to me, it's always all about comparison, right? So that warm occlusion shadow really does a lot to just add a little bit more warmth and depth in the painting. You could do this with a cooler shadow. No, if the value is correct, you could have made a cooler occlusion shadow. Would it have felt as believable? I would argue maybe not so much. So that's why I opted for a warmer occlusion shadow. Now you can see that in this painting, there's not a lot of highlights going on, right? If you were to bring this orange outside, you would probably get a lot more of a sharper specular highlight on the orange. But because the window light is a lot softer, it's definitely dampened down a little bit. We don't get as much of a sharp highlight on the teacup, and we don't get as much of a sharp highlight on the orange. Maybe the sharpest highlight is on the rind, or I'm not sure what you call it, but the white part on the bottom left orange. So when you reach a certain stage of your painting, I want to invite you to take the time to slow down. Sometimes it's not always about being fast and being able to paint in an hour and priding yourself in that, which is of course a great skill to have. But sometimes the moments where I've learned the most is when I really feel like I'm melting into my painting. It really feels like that, quite literally, where I'm letting myself play with different brushes, knocking down all inhibitions and just thinking, what does this do? What does that do? Not being afraid to ruin my painting because I know that I can problem solve my way back to how it was before. So, really take the time to search for the best strokes and the best shapes that you can. There's times where you want to paint fast, whether it be for a job or whether you're in plein air. And there's times where you really want to let yourself slow down, marinate in the painting, and really ask yourself critical questions of how you can make your painting better, how you could strip back, where you could add more, and how you can lift the painting up as a whole. So next time you're doing a painting where you're really enjoying the process, let yourself enjoy that process. Let yourself fail, let yourself make some mistakes, and let yourself challenge yourself to learn from those mistakes, because I promise you, you will only get better. Now with this still life, I didn't know how it was gonna come out. I just did the still life for the joy of doing a still life, and I personally don't love doing still lifes, but I found a lot of joy painting this and just finding beauty in the nuances of subtle color temperature shifts or hue shifts or shifts in neutral grays. And by the way, if some of you guys have the question of if I did this all in one layer, I did indeed do this all in one layer, which is how I always work in heavy paint. And here is the final image. You can see that I took some liberties to play around with subtle hue shifts of the same value in the background to make it just a little bit more interesting, but still to hopefully not take away from the focal point, which is the oranges and the teacup. I'm really happy with how it turned out, and I hope you like it too. Thank you so much for watching this tutorial, and I'll see you in the next one.